Bob, Curry Hoka mentioned last week on the tech broadcast that this would be like, there could be a second phase of bringing in other schools. Obviously, timeframes are fluid, but how do you react to what he said? And is that really realistic that a second wave could come for the Big 12?
Well, we actually had those conversations in our AD's meeting, and I'm not predicting that, but I don't know what's going to come down the pike in the years ahead. Even in the next 4 years, there's going to be lots of change, and so we'll look for targets of opportunity. We may find out down the road that larger alignments are going to be the order of the day. We may find ourselves going to 20 or 24 at some point in time. We could end up, college football could end up with something that's like the College Football Association, where maybe we have 40 or 50 teams in an organization. So there is lots of evolution taking place. There's lots of change afoot, and I think it's impossible to predict how these 4 or 5 major changes in college athletics are going to come together and end up creating a result. So I just think we have to be well positioned. I think the additions yesterday help us to be well positioned. I think it gives immediate additional strength to the 8 continuing members, and I think it puts us in the best position to manage the transition of OU and Texas leaving. But if there are opportunities down the road, or if there are clear indications that strategic additions might be necessary, we're going to be prepared to do that.
What gives you confidence the Big 12 will retain its Power 5 status?
I haven't seen anything at all that would lead me to believe we wouldn't. There really is nothing that is the Power 5. What we have is an autonomy designation, which is a governance designation within the NCAA. And what it means is we have weighted voting on issues in certain areas of the NCAA bylaws. And so the Power 5, so to speak, is a name that is coming out of a media characterization of the 5 conferences. So the autonomy designation, I think all we've done is strengthen ourselves from the standpoint of retaining it, and that conversation is really about how governance takes place. Now, as you know, there's a Constitution Committee that's underway within the NCAA, and they may decide that there is no autonomy designation any longer, but until something like that happens, I don't have any concerns whatsoever.
1, 2, 3,
Do you sense
4.
that this is going to
Jim
slow
Murphy,
down
test 1, 2. Referee microphone,
the
testing 1,
expansion
2,
of the playoff?
3,
There's been talk
4.
about it going to 12 teams, and now there's talk seemingly about maybe that slowing down a little bit. Where are you on that?
I think there are some headwinds. It's interesting where they're coming from, however. Some think that the process was flawed. I don't happen to be among those. I was on the subcommittee, and I know that it was very thorough, and I know that it took into account lots of different angles. There are those who think it's a mistake to extend the contract because we would be better served to take it to the open marketplace. There are those who just believe that there's enough turmoil in college football right now that doing something that has a long-standing impact is just not well advised right now. I think the board, the end of this month, the 28th is the meeting. I think they could choose to kick it to January, which is their next board meeting. I think they could make a decision to say, yeah, we're going to go to 12 and we aren't going to implement it until after the current contract's over. Or I think there could be something preemptive that could be put in place, and that'll be up to the Board of Managers to decide. And they'll obviously take a lot of input from the commissioners and each of us from our members.
Bob, Bryce Terry, Waco Trip. Can you take us a little through the emotions of these last 6 weeks or 7 weeks, however long it's been, that Oklahoma and Texas coming to you guys, and then to the point where we are now? Is it and was it gratifying to see these 4 schools added as quickly as you guys were able to do it?
Yeah, well, as Max said, there was a period of adjustment and I think introspection, as to what had just happened to each of the schools and what they were individually likely to consider going forward. I think that evolved into collective considerations of what our options were going forward, and I think that eventually yielded a belief that the 8 of us, the 8 continuing members, were committed to one another, and that we would be well advised to add some members. That was probably 3 weeks ago, and so you know, there were some. You know, I'd be less than honest if I didn't admit that there were some emotional aspects of it, but you know, I have to try and live my life above those circumstances a little bit and go do what the board wants me to do, and so that included eventually reaching back out to those institutions that had contacted us and expressed an interest. And unlike the process we went through in 2016, where we talked to 17 different schools, and really it was a voyage of exploration. This was more a targeted approach, and as Max said, our ADs and presidents looked at the list and qualities and competencies and capabilities of those that had reached out and quickly gravitated to these 4. That isn't to say there aren't other viable candidates. There were this time, and they may continue to be viable candidates going forward. I wouldn't presume to make any predictions on that. But you know, in the end, I was charged with going forth and trying to put the deals together, and that's what we did.
Given that they're still technically in the conference, were Texas and Oklahoma involved in these discussions at all? And have you gotten any indication on how this may affect their timetable going forward?
Well, to the second, I haven't gotten any indication at all. Everything that they have said is that they intend to meet the obligations of their grants of rights, which is through June 30th of 25. And what was the first part of the question?
Just were they involved at all during this process?
They were not involved in the consideration of the candidates.
The fact that the Big 12 was actually able to come to an agreement so quickly, what does that say about the conference as a whole as you guys continue to build your brand?
Well, Mac alluded to it earlier. I think it was a 2 or 3 part process. I think your first inclination as an institution is to think about what are we going to do, and what are our options, and how can we best guard against, you know, being flanked or have somebody else move on. And you know, there was lots of talk about this institution's going to the Big Ten, and this one's going to the Pac-12, and these are going to the ACC, and you know, it was the media kind of ran wild with the rumor mill. But in the end, I think the second phase of it was just what Mac described. It was our groups getting together with regularity, whether it was the AD group or the board group or the subgroup, the expansion subgroup that Mac served on. You know, I think eventually we evolved to a position of this is our reality. These are the legitimate options we have. You know, in the end, it was a very thoughtful process, and I think, and I don't want to characterize for the athletic directors or for Mac, but I think in working with our consultants and talking about who had reached out to us, we were unanimous in our belief that it was the time to go forward with 4, not 2, and that we wanted to make sure we left ourselves open in terms of options. So you know, I think that's the third piece of it, is you go and try and put the deals together, and we were fortunate to get affirmative answers from the 4 that we identified. And now I think we go about the process of integrating them on whatever timetable it ends up being, and then making sure that we're thinking strategically about what are the next moves. And we've been very open about the fact that this may not be the last the last step in the process, but there'll have to be reasons. I don't think we'll get bigger just to get bigger. It'll have to drive value, it'll have to drive competitiveness, it'll have to drive strategy, and so, you know, it'll be an empirical process.
Bob, along those lines, what's the time frame you guys might be looking at in terms of starting to work with your television partners on a new agreement, even though the grant of rights ends in 2025, but that along with future scheduling?
Well, future scheduling we'll begin working on Monday. You know, I characterize that as the micro, and we've been working on the macro until now. But we're going to have to start talking about the logistics and the blocking and tackling that goes along with that. In the case of our media, we have a stipulation that triggers discussions. There's a first negotiation, first right of refusal for both Fox and ESPN that triggers in March of '24. So that's when we'll start our conversations.